They erased me with one transaction, sold the only place that ever felt like mine without a word, without a thought. And when they finally remembered I existed, it wasn't to ask me home. It was to ask for $18,000, 10 months of silence, then this. A legal notice in my mailbox and a handwritten note demanding money for renovations on a house I didn't even know they'd sold. The cruelest part. They still expected me to pay for the privilege of being forgotten. My name is Emily Carter, and I've been invisible to my family for 10 months now. Not dead, just forgotten, which somehow feels worse. The silence started the day I left Redwood Falls, Iowa, with my Honda Civic packed tight and my bank account finally, blessedly mine. I remember looking in the rearview mirror at the Victorian house where I grew up, its peeling white paint and sagging porch steps still demanding my attention even as I drove away. I'd spent 5 years bleeding money into that house, into my family's endless emergencies, into my brother Ryan's failed dreams. 5 years of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one they called when the bills came due. Boulder, Colorado became my sanctuary. I found a studio apartment in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that made me feel like I was living inside a magazine spread. The rent was steep, but it was mine. No one could ask me to cover their half. No one could guilt me into paying for repairs I hadn't caused or debts I hadn't incurred. For the first time since college, I could buy groceries without calculating how much I'd need to wire home. I could see a movie without checking my phone for texts about Ryan's latest business venture, or Dad's medical bills, or Mom's emergency that always seemed to cost exactly what I had in savings. The marketing firm where I landed was small but growing, the kind of place where everyone brought their dogs to work and the coffee was always fresh. I threw myself into campaigns for local breweries and outdoor gear companies, work that felt authentic in a way my old job back home never had. In Redwood Falls, I'd been the girl who managed the insurance office, who was so good with numbers, who could always figure things out. Here, I was just Emily, the new coordinator with fresh ideas and no family baggage weighing down every conversation. I made friends slowly but deliberately. Sarah from accounting invited me hiking in the Flatirons. Marcus from creative brought me to his book club. These were people who knew nothing about the version of me that existed back home, the eternal fixer, the human ATM, the daughter who was only as valuable as her last deposit into the family account. The first few weeks, I jumped every time my phone buzzed, expecting the familiar pattern Ryan's name on the screen, followed by some variation of emergency that required immediate financial intervention. But the calls never came. Neither did the texts. The silence stretched from days into weeks, then months. At first, I told myself they were respecting my decision to leave, giving me space. But as fall turned to winter in Boulder, as I watched snow dust the peaks and learned to navigate black ice without calling home for sympathy, I began to understand the truth. They weren't respecting my space. They were discovering they could survive without me. Ryan still lived in the house. Of course. He'd never left, moving seamlessly from high school to community college to a series of business ideas that never quite took off. Landscaping, then pressure washing, then something involving cryptocurrency that Dad never fully explained during our last conversation. Each venture required startup capital that somehow always came from my account, paired with promises of repayment that evaporated as quickly as the businesses themselves. But apparently, they'd found other sources now, other solutions. The family machine had recalibrated, figured out how to function without my contributions. Part of me felt relieved finally. They were standing on their own. Another part, the part I tried not to examine too closely, felt utterly disposable. I created new routines that had nothing to do with Redwood Falls. Sunday morning hikes, Tuesday trivia at the brewery down the street, Friday evening cooking experiments that sometimes worked and sometimes ended with takeout Thai food eaten straight from the container while I binge-watched Netflix series my family would never understand. My apartment filled slowly with things that were purely mine: a succulent garden on the windowsill, art prints from local galleries, a coffee table I'd assembled myself without asking anyone for help. Small victories that felt enormous after years of living in the shadow of other people's needs. The silence from home should have felt like freedom. Most days, it did. But sometimes, late at night when the mountain winds rattled my windows, I'd catch myself wondering if they missed me at all, or if they'd simply updated their emergency contact lists and moved on. I never called to find out. Pride, maybe, or self-preservation. I'd spent so many years being the one who reached out, who checked in, who smoothed over family tensions with carefully worded texts and strategic visits. Let them miss me, I thought. Let them wonder how I was doing for once. 10 months of that silence. 10 months of learning who I was when I wasn't defined by what I could provide. 10 months of building a life that belonged entirely to me. I should have known it was too good to last. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday that had started like any other. I'd grabbed my usual coffee from the shop downstairs, checked emails while the morning light filtered through my apartment's industrial windows, and was planning another evening of meal prep and Netflix when I found it wedged between a utility bill and a credit card offer. The return address made my stomach drop. Morrison and Associates. Attorneys at law, Redwood Falls, Iowa. My hands shook slightly as I tore it open, coffee growing cold on my kitchen counter. Inside was a single sheet of legal letterhead, formal and impersonal. Property transfer, 214 Willow Street, Redwood Falls, IA. The words blurred together at first, my brain refusing to process what I was reading. Property sold. Transfer complete. Effective date 6 months ago. 6 months. I read the notice 3 times before the reality sank in. My childhood home, the Victorian house with the wraparound porch where I'd spent countless summers reading, where I'd painted my bedroom walls purple at 15, where I'd learned to drive in the gravel driveway had been sold 6 months ago, and nobody had told me. The paper crumpled in my fist before I smoothed it out again, desperate to find some mistake, some explanation that would make this make sense. But there it was, black ink on white paper. George and Denise Carter, sellers. No mention of Emily Carter anywhere, as if I'd never existed at all. I was still staring at the notice when my phone buzzed with a text from the Postal Service. Another piece of mail had been forwarded from my old address. 20 minutes later, I was at the mailbox again, this time pulling out a small envelope addressed in my mother's careful handwriting. The card inside was one of those generic ones you buy at grocery stores, flowers on the front. Thinking of you in cursive script, but it was the message inside that made my hands shake with something darker than shock. Emily, it read in Mom's familiar blue ink. The house needs extensive renovations before the buyers can finalize everything. We know you're doing well out there in Colorado. We need you to cover $18,000 of the renovation costs. It's only fair since it was your home too. The contractors need payment by next month. Love. Mom and Dad. I read it again, then again. Then I sat down hard on my couch and laughed a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off my apartment walls. Only fair, because it was my home too. The home they'd sold without telling me. The home I'd learned about from a legal notice forwarded by strangers. The home where apparently I'd been erased so thoroughly that they could sell it and still sleep at night, only remembering my existence when they needed money for repairs. $18,000, more than half my savings account. Money I'd painstakingly built up over 10 months of not bleeding cash into their endless emergencies. Money that represented freedom, security, the life I'd finally started building for myself. And they wanted it for renovations on a house that was no longer ours. A house they'd sold behind my back and somehow still expected me to pay for. I called in sick to work. I couldn't imagine sitting through meetings about brewery campaigns and social media strategies when my entire history had just been erased with a signature I'd never been asked to witness. Instead, I spent the day pacing my apartment, the legal notice and greeting card spread across my coffee table like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite name. The betrayal felt physical, a tight knot in my chest that made breathing difficult. It wasn't just about the money, though. $18,000 was more than I'd ever been asked for in a single request. It wasn't even about the house. Exactly. Though the thought of strangers living in my childhood bedroom made me nauseous. It was about being erased, about 10 months of silence that I'd interpreted as independence but was actually abandonment, about being remembered only when they needed something from me, as if I were a bank account with legs rather than a daughter who'd spent years trying to hold their world together. I thought about calling them, demanding explanations, but what was there to explain? The facts were clear. They'd sold the house 6 months ago without a word to me, and now they needed money for repairs. In their minds, this was probably reasonable. Emily was always good for money. Emily always came through. Why should this time be different? The evening sun was setting behind the mountains when I finally picked up the cards again. The legal notice felt heavier somehow, weighted with finality. The greeting card felt like an insult wrapped in pastel flowers and platitudes. I'd spent 10 months learning to exist without them. I'd built routines and friendships and a life that had nothing to do with Redwood Falls. I'd started to believe that I could be more than just the family's financial safety net. But this proved how wrong I'd been. In their eyes. I wasn't a daughter who deserved to know about major family decisions. I wasn't someone whose feelings mattered when it came to selling the house where I'd grown up. I was just a resource to be tapped when needed, a person who existed only in the context of what I could provide. The worst part was the casual assumption in Mom's note, not, "Would you be willing to help?" or, "We know this is a lot to ask." Just, "We need you to cover $18,000, as if my compliance was guaranteed, as if I owed them this money for the privilege of having lived in a house they'd sold without my knowledge. I set the cards aside and opened my laptop. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, maybe it was time I started acting like one. If they could make life-changing decisions without me, maybe I could make some decisions without them too. The cursor blinked on a blank document as I tried to figure out where to start. How do you respond to being erased? How do you fight back against people who see you only as a solution to their problems? I didn't know yet, but for the first time in 10 months, I was angry enough to find out. Sleep became impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until 3:30 in the morning, then gave up and made coffee in the dark. The greeting card sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation. Mom's cheerful handwriting demanding $18,000 as if it were pocket change. I pulled out my laptop and opened my banking app, something I'd avoided doing since the letters arrived. But if I was going to respond to this insanity, I needed to know exactly how much they'd taken from me over the years. I needed to see the pattern laid out in black and white. The numbers were worse than I remembered. I started with the most recent transfers, working backward through 5 years of digital transactions. Each one came flooding back with painful clarity. March 2024, $3,000 for Ryan's emergency truck repairs after his landscaping equipment was supposedly stolen. January 2024, $1,500 for Dad's dental work that insurance wouldn't cover. November 2023, $2,000 to help with property taxes they'd forgotten to save for. The list went on and on. Ryan's failed pressure washing business, $4,000. Mom's urgent roof repairs, $3,500. Dad's medications when he was between insurance plans, $800. Ryan's community college tuition, $6,000. The water heater that died in the middle of winter, $1,200. Every transfer had come with the same promise: "We'll pay you back as soon as things settle down." Every crisis had been presented as temporary, unexpected, a one-time emergency that just required a little family support to get through. But the repayments never came. The temporary help became permanent subsidies. And meanwhile, Ryan got gifts that were never loans at all. A used Honda when he turned 16. His half of the rent for the apartment above the garage that he'd lived in for 2 years before moving back into the main house. Spring break trips to Florida that were presented as graduation presents, despite his barely passing grades. I made a spreadsheet, categorizing every transfer. Emergency medical, $4,800. Home repairs, $9,200. Ryan's businesses, $7,100. Ryan's personal expenses, $5,900. Miscellaneous temporary help, $3,800. The grand total made me physically sick. $26,400. More than a year's salary at my old job. More than the down payment I'd been saving for before I started hemorrhaging money into their crisis du jour. More than enough to have paid off my student loans or bought a reliable car or taken the photography classes I'd always wanted to try. $26,000 that I'd given freely, believing their promises, trusting their emergencies were real and their need was temporary. $26,000 that had never been repaid, never even acknowledged after the immediate crisis passed. And now they wanted $18,000 more. I pulled up Ryan's Facebook page, something I'd avoided for months. His latest posts painted a picture that made my spreadsheet feel like evidence of a crime. Photos from last weekend's fishing trip with his buddies. A new gaming setup in his bedroom, the same bedroom in the house they'd sold without telling me. A post about taking his girlfriend out for her birthday, complete with pictures of an expensive dinner I was pretty sure I'd indirectly paid for. While living my best life in beautiful Iowa, read his most recent caption, posted 3 days ago. Below it, dozens of likes and comments from high school friends who'd never left town. Mom had commented with heart emojis and, "So proud of my boy." I scrolled back further, looking for any mention of the house being sold. Nothing. If Ryan had known, he hadn't shared it publicly. But the photos told their own story. He was still living there as recently as last month, still treating it like his personal crash pad while I was getting legal notices about property transfers. The pattern became clearer as I dug deeper into my bank records. Every time I'd sent money for one of Ryan's emergencies, he'd post something new within weeks. New fishing gear after the truck repair fund. A weekend trip to Chicago after the business loan. He'd been spending my money while I ate ramen and skipped social events to keep my own budget afloat. But it was the contrast in our treatment that really shattered whatever family loyalty I had left. I pulled up old text conversations with Mom, looking for mentions of gifts or support that had gone my way. The search came up empty. When I'd needed help with my car registration in college, I'd been told it was a learning experience to figure it out myself. When I'd asked for help with textbooks, Dad had lectured me about budgeting and personal responsibility. Ryan got handed everything. I got handed the bills. The sun was rising over the mountains by the time I finished my financial archaeology. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, replaced by a steady burn of rage that felt more clarifying than any caffeine. I had documentation now, proof of years of systematic exploitation dressed up as family loyalty. They'd taken $26,000 from me while giving Ryan a free ride through his 20s. They'd sold my childhood home without a conversation while expecting me to fund repairs for buyers I'd never met. They'd cropped me out of their lives but kept me in their financial plans. I thought about the house itself, about all the unpaid labor I'd contributed over the years, mowing that massive lawn every weekend during high school while Ryan played video games, painting the kitchen when I was home from college, because Mom said it would be good family bonding time, cleaning gutters, raking leaves, shoveling snow, all the maintenance that had apparently added value to a property I'd been excluded from selling. The $18,000 they wanted now was probably for cosmetic fixes to increase the sale price. Fresh paint, new flooring, updated fixtures, improvements that would go directly into the sellers' pockets, the same sellers who'd forgotten to mention they were selling. I closed my laptop and looked out at Boulder's skyline, at the life I'd built from scratch after years of funding theirs. The morning light painted the mountains gold, beautiful and distant and completely separate from the mess of manipulation I'd left behind in Iowa. They thought I was still the same Emily who would scramble to solve their problems, who would liquidate her savings account because family came first. They thought 10 months of silence hadn't changed anything, that I'd still be available to bankroll their decisions and clean up their mistakes. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The real estate listing was still live when I found it that afternoon. A simple Google search, 214 Willow Street, Redwood Falls, Iowa, and there it was, glowing on my laptop screen like a digital crime scene. Sold blazed across the top in red letters, but the photos remained, a glossy tour through my erased childhood. I clicked through them with the sick fascination of someone watching their own funeral. The living room where I'd done homework on the coffee table Mom always complained about pristine now, staged with throw pillows in colors we'd never owned. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook Sunday dinners for four, updated with granite countertops I'd never seen, cabinet hardware that gleamed under professional lighting. But it was my bedroom that broke something inside me. The walls I'd painted purple at 15 were now a neutral beige. The window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading was styled with decorative books that clearly hadn't been opened leather-bound volumes arranged by height rather than interest. The corner where my desk had sat, where I'd written college application essays and scholarship letters, now held a generic plant in a ceramic pot. Every trace of me had been erased. 22 years of living in that room, and they'd wiped it clean like I'd never existed. I scrolled down to the listing details, my hands shaking with something between grief and rage. Charming Victorian home with original hardwood floors and period details, lovingly maintained by the same family for over 30 years. The asking price made my stomach drop. They'd gotten almost double what they'd paid for it in the 90s. The virtual tour was a masterpiece of staging. Soft lighting highlighted architectural features I'd forgotten about. Fresh flowers sat on the mantelpiece in the parlor where we'd opened Christmas presents. The dining room table, our actual dining room table, was set for four with place settings that looked like they came from a catalog. But it was the family photos on that mantelpiece that made me screenshot everything. They'd curated our family history, Christmas morning photos from when Ryan and I were kids, but only the ones where I was partially hidden behind him or turned away from the camera. A vacation picture from Lake Okoboji where I'd been cropped out entirely. You could see the edge of my shoulder in the original. But now it was just Mom, Dad, and Ryan smiling at the camera. My high school graduation photo, the one that had hung in the hallway for 14 years, was gone. In its place, Ryan's community college certificate ceremony, an event I remembered because I'd been the one to pay for his cap and gown. College graduation photos lined one shelf, Ryan's associate degree prominently displayed. My bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, the achievement that had required 3 jobs and endless scholarship applications, was nowhere to be seen. They'd rewritten our family story, editing me out while keeping just enough photos to fill the spaces. To anyone viewing the listing, the Carter family had 2 children, not 3. Ryan was the successful one, the one worth celebrating and remembering. I found myself searching for evidence that I'd ever lived there at all. The photos of the upstairs hallway showed the wall where my academic awards had hung honor roll certificates, scholarship announcements, the debate team trophy I'd won senior year. All gone, replaced by generic landscape prints that matched the staging company's aesthetic. The basement showed the corner where I'd set up my art supplies during high school, where I'd painted watercolors and sketched charcoal portraits of classmates. Now it was a flexible recreation space with a ping-pong table and exercise equipment I'd never seen before. Even the backyard had been sanitized. The garden plot where I'd grown vegetables for a 4-H project was now a manicured flower bed. The treehouse Dad and I had built when I was 12, the one project where he'd actually wanted my help, had been removed entirely. I clicked through the photos again, looking for anything that proved I'd been part of this family's story, but the staging was complete, professional, thorough, and devastating. The listing agent's description painted a picture of domestic bliss. This loving family home has been the heart of countless memories, from holiday gatherings to milestone celebrations. The sellers have maintained every detail with care, creating spaces perfect for making new memories. Loving family home, maintained every detail. The same family that had taken $26,000 from me and sold the house without a phone call. I found more photos on the real estate company's Facebook page, behind-the-scenes shots of the staging process. There was Mom, directing the placement of furniture in my old bedroom. There was Dad, helping arrange books on the shelves where my personal library had once lived, both of them smiling, proud of how beautiful everything looked. The comments section made my hands clench into fists. Neighbors congratulating them on the sale. Friends reminiscing about parties and gatherings in that house. "You raised such wonderful kids there," wrote Mrs. Henderson from next door. "Ryan turned out so well." No mention of me, not even from people who'd known me since I was 5 years old. I scrolled further and found the official announcement Mom had posted in the Redwood Falls Community Facebook group. The photo showed her, Dad, and Ryan standing in front of the sold sign, arms around each other, beaming at the camera. After years of hard work, we've sold the Carter house to a wonderful new family, she'd written. So excited for this next chapter, Ryan has been such a help through this whole process. 43 likes, dozens of congratulations, comments about how handsome Ryan looks and how well-deserved this success was for such a dedicated family. I read every comment twice, looking for anyone who might ask about me. Surely someone in that small town remembered that the Carter family had a daughter. Surely someone would wonder where Emily was in this major family milestone. But no one did. Either they'd forgotten I existed, or Mom had done such a thorough job of explaining my absence that no one thought to question it. Maybe she'd told them I was too busy with my new life to be involved. Maybe she'd spun some story about how I'd chosen career over family and didn't care about home anymore. Or maybe, after 10 months of my absence from family gatherings and town events, people had simply stopped thinking of me as part of the Carter family at all. I saved screenshots of everything: the listing photos, the Facebook posts, the comments, evidence of my erasure, documented with timestamps and social media trails. The same technology that had helped them erase me would help me prove what they'd done. The house sold for $37,000 more than the asking price. The buyers were a young family from Des Moines. According to the final Facebook post celebrating the closing, Mom had included a photo of them signing papers, all smiles and excitement about their dream home. My dream home, the only place that had ever really felt like mine, now belonging to strangers who would never know that a girl named Emily had once lived in the purple bedroom, had mowed that lawn every summer, had painted those kitchen walls during spring break of her sophomore year in college. I closed my laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my Boulder apartment. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the mountain backdrop, beautiful and foreign and completely separate from the life I'd thought I was still connected to. They'd sold my history, erased my childhood, pocketed the profit, and then asked me to pay for the privilege. I called Mom at 8:15 on a Thursday morning, knowing she'd be home from her morning walk, but before she started her daily soap operas. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice answered, slightly breathless. Emily, oh my goodness, we were just talking about you yesterday. How are you, sweetheart? The casual warmth in her voice, as if we'd spoken last week instead of 10 months ago, made my jaw clench. I got your letter, I said without preamble. A pause. Oh, good. I wasn't sure if it would reach you with all your moving around out there, so you can help with the renovation costs. We really need to get the contractors paid by... Mom! My voice was steady, controlled. You sold the house. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, yes. We told you we were thinking about downsizing. When did you tell me that? I could hear her shifting in her chair, the familiar creak of the kitchen furniture I'd grown up with. Furniture that was probably in some stranger's house now. Emily, we discussed this. You know we've been talking about it for years? We haven't talked about anything for 10 months. That's not... She stopped herself, regrouped. You've been so busy with your new life out there. We didn't want to bother you with every little detail of what's happening here. Every little detail. Selling the family home was a little detail. I found the listing online, I said. Saw all the photos. Interesting staging choices. Her voice tightened slightly. The real estate company handled all that. You know how these things work? They make everything look perfect for buyers. They made me look like I never existed. Emily, that's dramatic. You're being... Well, where are my graduation photos? Mom, my academic awards. The portrait I painted of you that hung in the hallway for 6 years. Silence stretched between us. I could picture her in the kitchen of whatever rental or apartment they'd moved to, probably clutching her coffee mug with the chip on the handle that she'd refused to throw away for 15 years. The staging company said personal photos were distracting to buyers. She finally said, "We stored everything safely. Nothing was thrown away. But my photos were distracting. Ryan's weren't." Ryan was more involved in the process. He helped with the showings, the preparations. "Because you told him about it." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Because he lives there. Because he's part of the family decisions." You left, Emily." The words came out sharp, defensive. "You chose to move across the country. You chose your career over being here for us. Ryan stayed. Ryan was available when we needed help." Available. The word hung between us like an accusation. Available to help with showings and staging, but apparently not available to contribute to any of the $26,000 in emergencies over the past 5 years. So this was punishment for moving away. Don't be ridiculous. This isn't about punishment. It's about practicality. We needed to sell the house, and we needed someone who could be present for the process. That wasn't you. Her tone had shifted from defensive to lecturing. The same voice she'd used when I was 16 and had questioned why Ryan got a car while I got a lecture about earning things myself. "Fine," I said. "Then why do you need $18,000 from me for renovations?" "Because," she stumbled slightly, "because it was your home too. You benefited from living there all those years. It's only fair that you contribute to—" Fair. The word came out like a bark of laughter. Fair would have been including me in the decision to sell. Fair would have been asking my opinion about the biggest financial decision our family has made in 30 years. Fair would have been a phone call. "We knew you'd be upset," she said, her voice smaller now. "We knew you'd try to talk us out of it, or make it complicated with your feelings about the house. We were trying to protect you from the stress." Protect me? By erasing me? By selling my childhood home and then demanding money for repairs on a house that no longer belonged to any of us? "Who are the buyers?" I asked. "What?" "The buyers who bought the house." "I don't see why that matters." "Because I want to know who's living in my bedroom. I want to know what family gets to make memories in the kitchen where I learned to cook. I want to know whose kids will play in the backyard where I buried my hamster when I was 8. She was quiet for a long moment. "The Hendersons," she finally said. "Young couple from Des Moines. They have a little girl." I closed my eyes, picturing strangers in my purple bedroom, a little girl who would never know that another girl had once sat in that window seat reading Nancy Drew mysteries until past her bedtime. "And you need $18,000 for renovations before they can move in." "The inspection found some issues. The furnace needs work, and there's some electrical updating required. The buyers are willing to proceed, but we need to fix everything first." "With my money?" "With family money. You're still part of this family, Emily, even if you don't live here anymore. Part of the family when they needed money, not part of the family when they were making decisions about selling the house where I'd grown up." The selective inclusion was so blatant it was almost funny. "What does Ryan think about all this?" I asked. Ryan understands that sometimes families have to make difficult decisions. He's been very supportive. "Has he contributed anything to these renovation costs?" Another pause. "Ryan's situation is different. He's still establishing himself. He's 28 years old. Mom, I was supporting myself at 22. And we're very proud of how successful you've become. That's why we know you can help with this. We raised you to be responsible, to care about family." Responsible. There was that word again. I was responsible for solving their problems, but not responsible enough to be included in their decisions. "I need to think about this," I said. "Emily, the contractors need—" I said I need to think about it. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We're family. We help each other." "Do we?" I asked, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I help you, and you help Ryan, and nobody helps me. "That's not fair. We've always—" "I have to go," I said, and hung up before she could finish the sentence. I sat in my quiet apartment, hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. The conversation had confirmed everything I'd suspected from the photos and the timeline. I wasn't part of their family, I was their emergency fund. Ryan was the son who mattered, who got included and supported and celebrated. I was the daughter who existed to solve problems and fund solutions. They'd tried to protect me from the stress of selling, but not from the stress of paying for repairs. They'd excluded me from the profit, but included me in the costs. For the first time in 10 months, I was grateful for the silence that had stretched between us. It had shown me exactly what I meant to them. And now it was time to show them exactly what that meant to me. The fury carried me through 3 days of meticulous documentation. I approached it like a marketing campaign, which, in a way, it was. I was about to market the truth to a town that had forgotten I existed. I started with screenshots, every photo from the real estate listing, saved with timestamps, the Facebook announcement with its conspicuous absence of any mention of me, the comments celebrating Ryan's helpfulness, the staged photos where I'd been systematically erased from family history. Then came the financial records. I exported every bank transfer from the past 5 years, highlighted in a spreadsheet that told the story of systematic exploitation. Each wire transfer was labeled Ryan's truck repair, unreturned. Dad's dental work, unreturned. Property taxes, unreturned. The pattern was undeniable when laid out in columns and rows. I cross-referenced the dates with Ryan's Facebook posts, creating a timeline that showed exactly how my emergency loans had funded his lifestyle. My $3,000 for his stolen landscaping equipment had been followed 2 weeks later by photos of him at a Cubs game. The $2,000 for urgent property taxes had preceded his girlfriend's birthday weekend in Chicago by exactly 1 month. But the real masterpiece was the photo comparison I created. Side by side, images the original family photos I'd saved over the years next to the cropped versions that had been staged for the house listing. The evidence was stark. They'd literally edited me out of our family history for better curb appeal. I spent Friday evening crafting the letter. Not to my parents, they'd had their chance to include me in family decisions. This was for the Redwood Falls Gazette and the community Facebook group where Mom had announced the sale with such pride. I wrote it like a press release, professional and factual. To the community of Redwood Falls. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm writing to clarify some misinformation that has been circulating about the recent sale of 214 Willow Street. While my parents, George and Denise Carter, have presented this as a family decision, I was not informed of their intention to sell our childhood home until I received a legal notice 6 months after the transaction was completed. I learned about the sale the same way any stranger would through forwarded mail from a law office. This might seem like a private family matter, except for one detail despite being excluded from all decisions regarding the sale. I have now been asked to contribute $18,000 toward renovation costs for the new buyers. Some of you may be wondering why this matters to the community. It matters because the narrative being shared about the Carter family's success and togetherness is built on a foundation of financial exploitation that I can no longer ignore. Over the past 5 years, I have provided $26,400 in financial support to my family money that was always described as temporary loans, but never repaid. During this same period, my brother Ryan received gifts including tuition payments, vehicle purchases, and living expenses, none of which required repayment. I include this documentation not out of spite, but because the community deserves to know the truth about the family they've been celebrating. The same people who accept your congratulations for their success have systematically excluded me from family decisions while exploiting my financial stability. To those who have commented on recent Facebook posts about how well Ryan turned out and what a dedicated family the Carters are, I want you to know that this dedication apparently doesn't extend to including all family members in major decisions or treating all children with equal respect. To the new owners of 214 Willow Street, I sincerely hope your family creates the loving memories in that house that mine was never quite able to achieve. You deserve to know that the lovingly maintained family home you purchased was staged by removing all evidence that a daughter named Emily ever lived there. The Carter family story you've been hearing is incomplete. I wanted you to have the full picture. Sincerely, Emily Carter Boulder, Colorado. I attached the photo comparisons, the financial spreadsheet, and screenshots of the real estate listing. Then, I wrote a shorter version for Facebook, designed for maximum impact. For those celebrating the Carter family's recent house sale, I'm Emily Carter, the daughter who was cropped out of the listing photos and excluded from the decision to sell our childhood home. I found out through a legal notice 6 months later, followed by a request for $18,000 in renovation costs. The same family that took $26,400 from me over 5 years while giving my brother everything for free. Just wanted you to have the complete story before you congratulate them again. I posted it to the Redwood Falls community group at 11:30 on a Friday night, knowing that weekend scrolling would give it maximum visibility. Then I emailed the longer version to the Gazette with the subject line, "Correction to recent Carter family coverage." The response was immediate. Within an hour, the Facebook post had 12 comments and 28 reactions. My phone started buzzing with friend requests from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. Messages began flooding in. Emily, I always wondered why you weren't at family events anymore. I remember you helping me with algebra. You were always so responsible. This explains a lot. Your parents told everyone you were too busy with career success to visit. Guess we know the real story now. I taught you in 3rd grade. You deserved better than this. Saturday morning brought a message that made my coffee cup shake in my hands. It was from Mrs. Patterson, my high school English teacher. Emily, I've been wondering about you for years. Your mother always had excuses for why you weren't at graduations or weddings anymore. She made it sound like you'd become too good for Redwood Falls. I suspected there was more to the story. I'm so sorry this happened to you, and I'm proud of you for speaking up. By Saturday afternoon, the post had been shared 47 times. The comments section had become a battlefield, with longtime family friends demanding explanations and neighbors sharing their own observations about the family dynamics they'd witnessed over the years. The most devastating comment came from Ryan himself. I had no idea about the money. Mom and Dad told me Emily was doing great and didn't need help, that she preferred to be independent. They said you never wanted to be involved in family decisions because you were building your own life. I believed them. I'm so sorry. I wish I had known. Even through my anger, that message hit differently. Ryan might have been the golden child, but he'd also been fed lies about my absence. They'd manipulated both of us, just in different ways. By Sunday morning, my phone was buzzing constantly. Messages from old friends, former teachers, even distant relatives who'd seen the post shared in other groups. The story was spreading beyond Redwood Falls, reaching the extended network of people who'd known our family over the years. But it was the message from Sarah Hendricks at the Gazette that told me the campaign was working. Emily, we'd like to run your story in Wednesday's edition. Can you provide any additional documentation? This is exactly the kind of accountability journalism our readers expect from us. I looked out at the mountains from my Boulder apartment, the same view that had represented freedom and independence for 10 months. Now it represented something else, the distance I'd put between myself and people who saw me only as a solution to their problems. The truth was spreading through Redwood Falls like ripples in a pond. And somewhere in that small Iowa town, my parents were probably just waking up to discover that their carefully maintained reputation was crumbling under the weight of documented facts. They'd wanted to protect themselves from the stress of including me in family decisions. Now they were about to learn what real stress felt like. The phone calls started at 6:45 Monday morning. I let them all go to voicemail, Mom's increasingly frantic messages, Dad's confused demands for explanations, even one from Ryan that I almost answered before deciding I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. By noon, the Facebook post had been shared 83 times and the comments had reached triple digits. The Redwood Falls community was having a reckoning, and my family was at the center of it. The real breakthrough came when Jennifer Walsh, someone I barely remembered from high school, posted a comment that changed everything. This explains so much. Emily, Do you remember when your mom asked me not to mention seeing you at the bank during your senior year? She said you were embarrassed about working and didn't want people to know. I thought it was weird because you should have been proud you were working 2 jobs to save for college while Ryan got everything handed to him. Now I realize she was probably embarrassed that her daughter was more responsible than her son. That comment unlocked a flood of similar stories. People began sharing their own observations about our family dynamics, pieces of a puzzle they'd never been able to assemble until now. Tom Bradley, who'd owned the hardware store, wrote, "Emily used to come in buying supplies for house repairs when she was barely 18. Always paid cash. Always knew exactly what she needed. George would come in later asking for advice on the same projects, acting like he was handling everything himself." Mrs. Morrison from the church added, "I always wondered why Emily stopped coming to family events after college. Denise would make excuses Emily was too career-focused or didn't prioritize family anymore. But Emily was the one who organized George's surprise birthday party and coordinated Denise's Mother's Day celebrations for years. The dedication was all one way." The most damaging revelation came from Linda Foster, who'd worked at the bank. I probably shouldn't share this, but Emily's story explains some things I observed professionally. There were multiple occasions when George or Denise would come in asking about Emily's account balance or recent transactions. Of course, we couldn't share that information, but the fact that they were asking says everything about how they viewed her finances. My parents had been monitoring my money, tracking my ability to fund their emergencies. The newspaper article published Wednesday morning was devastating in its clinical precision. Sarah Hendricks had done her homework, reaching out to former teachers, neighbors, and even the real estate agent who'd handled the listing. The agent, clearly uncomfortable, had confirmed that the staging company was instructed to remove personal items that might distract buyers, but couldn't explain why Ryan's photos remained while mine disappeared. The headline read, "Family Financial Exploitation When Emergency, Help Becomes Systematic Abuse." The subheading was even worse. Local family's success story built on hidden exploitation of adult daughter. By Thursday, the story had been picked up by a regional paper in Des Moines. Someone had submitted it to a popular Reddit forum about family dysfunction, where it exploded with over 15,000 upvotes and 3,000 comments from people sharing similar experiences. But it was Friday's development that showed me how completely their world was unraveling. Ryan's girlfriend, Melissa, posted her own statement in the community group. "I need to address something publicly because I can't stay silent anymore. After reading Emily's post and seeing the evidence she provided, I confronted Ryan about his family's treatment of his sister. What I learned disgusted me. Ryan showed me bank statements proving that Emily sent money regularly for emergencies that I personally witnessed being spent on non-emergencies. The stolen equipment that required $3,000, Ryan had actually damaged it himself and was too ashamed to tell his parents. The urgent property taxes. They had the money but spent it on a vacation to Branson instead. I've been with Ryan for 2 years and never once heard Emily's name mentioned in a positive way. I was told she was selfish and had chosen career over family. I was told she didn't care about home anymore and thought she was too good for Iowa. The truth is that Emily was being systematically erased from this family while funding their lifestyle. I can't be with someone who participated in this level of cruelty toward his own sister, even if he claims he didn't know the full extent. Ryan, your sister deserves better. Your parents deserve to be held accountable. And this community deserves to know who they've really been supporting all these years. The post was shared over 200 times within hours. Ryan's response, posted later that evening, was a public meltdown. "I'm done defending them. Emily, if you're reading this, I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. I found Mom's notebook where she tracked your bank transfers and called them Emily contributions. She had a whole system for timing requests to maximize what you'd send. I thought I was the favorite, but really I was just another tool they used to manipulate you. They made me think you didn't care about us, when really they were bleeding you dry and hiding it from me. I've left the house. I can't look at them anymore." That revelation Mom's notebook tracking my financial contributions like a business ledger was the detail that broke the community's last bit of sympathy for my parents. The comments on Ryan's post were unanimous in their disgust. Former family friends were publicly distancing themselves. The church committee Mom served on had apparently asked for her resignation. Dad's weekly poker group had canceled their games indefinitely. But the most satisfying moment came Saturday morning, when I received a message from Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who'd commented on the original house sale announcement. "Emily, I owe you an apology. I was one of the people who congratulated your parents on raising such a wonderful son without thinking about where you were in the picture. After reading everything this week, I went back through my photos from neighborhood events. You're in dozens of them, always helping, always working, always contributing, yet somehow you became invisible to all of us. I don't know how your parents managed to erase you so completely from our awareness, but I'm ashamed I let it happen. You deserved better from all of us." She was right. It hadn't just been my parents who'd erased me, it had been an entire community that had somehow accepted my disappearance without question. They'd celebrated Ryan's achievements while forgetting that I'd helped fund them. They'd praised my parents' success while ignoring the daughter who'd made much of it possible. The systematic nature of my erasure was becoming clear to everyone, including me. This hadn't been simple favoritism or accidental oversight. It had been deliberate, calculated, and community-wide. By Sunday, the original Facebook post had been shared over 400 times and had reached people in 3 states. The story had become bigger than one family's dysfunction. It had become a case study in financial abuse and community complicity. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Emily, this is Patricia Williams from Channel 7 News in Des Moines. We'd like to interview you about your story for our segment on family financial exploitation. This is an important issue that needs more coverage." I stared at the message, realizing how far this had traveled from my original goal of simply telling the truth to my hometown. The story had resonated because it wasn't unique. It was a pattern that happened in families across the country, usually in silence. But I'd broken the silence, and in doing so, I'd discovered that the community that had forgotten me was capable of remembering. They were capable of seeing the truth when it was presented clearly enough. Now they were seeing my parents exactly as they were people who had built their reputation on the exploitation of a daughter they'd trained everyone to forget. The reckoning was complete. All that remained was watching them face the consequences of years of manipulation finally brought into the light. The closing celebration happened exactly as the town gossip pages had promised. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be half of Redwood Falls documented it for me on social media, though not in the way my parents had hoped. The event was held at the community center, the same place where I'd attended 4-H meetings and high school graduation parties. According to the posts trickling in throughout the evening, about 30 people showed up, a fraction of the crowd my parents had probably expected for their celebration of a new chapter. The photos told the story of an evening that went sideways fast. Early posts showed Mom and Dad standing awkwardly by a cake decorated with a house-shaped design, smiling too widely at a camera held by someone whose enthusiasm was clearly forced. But as the evening progressed, the energy shifted. Jennifer Walsh posted a video at 7:23 that captured the moment everything unraveled. Mom was attempting to give a speech about family sacrifices and building something beautiful together when someone in the crowd I couldn't see who interrupted with a loud, "Where's Emily in all these sacrifices? Denise!" The room went silent. You could hear Mom's microphone feedback as her hand shook slightly. Dad stepped forward, trying to take control. But Tom Bradley's voice cut through clearly. "We've all seen the bank records, George. We know what really happened." What followed was 3 minutes of the most uncomfortable social media content I'd ever witnessed. Mom tried to salvage the moment by claiming I was doing wonderfully in Colorado and too busy to be involved. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Mrs. Patterson, my former English teacher, stood up in the middle of the room and said, "Denise, we've all read the newspaper article. We've seen the photos where Emily was cropped out. Stop lying to us." The comments on that video were brutal. People who'd known our family for decades were publicly expressing their disgust. The community had turned, and there was no going back. But it was Ryan's arrival at 8:45 that provided the final nail in their reputation's coffin. He walked into the community center carrying a manila folder, his face set in grim determination. "I need to say something," he announced, loud enough to quiet the scattered conversations. According to multiple witnesses, he then proceeded to read from Mom's notebook, the one he'd found that tracked my financial contributions like a business ledger. "Emily Emergency Fund, Spring 2022, he read aloud. "Note, best time to ask is after she gets tax refund. Amount requested $3,000. Amount received $3,000. Use vacation to Branson. Repayment plan none." The room was deadly silent as he continued reading entries that laid bare years of calculated manipulation. Each emergency was revealed as a planned extraction, each crisis as a fabricated excuse to access my bank account. Mom tried to grab the notebook from him, but Ryan stepped back and kept reading. "Emily Emergency Fund, Fall 2023. Note mentioned Dad's dental pain for emotional impact. Amount requested $1,500. Amount received $1,500. Use new living room furniture. Repayment plan none." By the time he finished, half the room had pulled out their phones to record. The other half was staring at my parents with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The celebration had become a public trial, and the verdict was unanimous. Dad tried to defend himself, claiming they'd always intended to pay Emily back and that the notebook was just Mom's way of keeping track of family finances. But his explanations sounded hollow in the face of documented evidence of systematic exploitation. The final blow came when someone in the crowd asked about the $18,000 they'd requested for renovations. Mom, flustered and defensive, snapped that I was being selfish and punishing them for making a practical decision about the house. The room exploded. People who'd remained silent through the bank record revelations couldn't stay quiet through that. A dozen voices rose at once, pointing out that excluding me from the sale decision while expecting me to fund the consequences wasn't practical. It was cruel. The celebration ended with my parents leaving through the community center's back door while the crowd continued discussing the revelations they'd witnessed. The cake remained untouched on the table, its cheerful house decoration now seeming like a mockery. Ryan posted his own video later that night, standing in the parking lot of the apartment complex where he was now living. "I want everyone to know that Emily tried to include me in her life for years. She sent me graduation cards, birthday messages, even Christmas presents I never thanked her for because Mom and Dad told me she was just trying to buy our forgiveness for abandoning the family. They poisoned me against my own sister while she was keeping us financially afloat. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for believing their lies." The next morning, I woke up in my Boulder apartment to 47 messages, dozens of friend requests, and 3 interview requests from national news outlets. The story had spread beyond Iowa, resonating with people across the country who recognized similar patterns in their own families. But it was the message from the new owners of 214 Willow Street that made me smile. "Emily, we're the family who bought your childhood home. After everything that's come to light, we wanted you to know that you're welcome to visit anytime. We have a daughter about the age you were when you lived here, and we'd love for her to hear about the girl who once read books in the window seat and painted these walls purple. Your history deserves to be remembered." I never did send that $18,000. Instead, I used it for a down payment on a condo with mountain views and space for the art studio I'd always wanted. The same money they'd expected me to pour into their mistakes became the foundation for something entirely mine. 6 months later, Ryan drove out to visit me in Colorado. We spent a weekend hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park, talking about everything we'd missed during the years when their manipulation had kept us apart. He'd started therapy and was working to rebuild his life without their financial support. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. We never discussed reconciling with our parents. Some betrayals are too systematic, too calculated, too deliberate to forgive. They'd built their comfort on my sacrifice and their reputation on my erasure. When the truth finally came to light, they lost both. I still live in Boulder, still work in marketing, still wake up every morning in a space that belongs entirely to me. The silence that once felt like abandonment now feels like peace. I learned that being forgotten by people who only valued me for what I could provide wasn't loss, it was liberation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's simply telling the truth and letting other people see clearly what you've always known. In the end, that truth was more devastating than any punishment I could have devised. The community that had forgotten me remembered how to see, and once they saw clearly, my parents' carefully constructed image crumbled like a house built on sand. Some foundations, it turns out, can't support the weight of lies forever. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own family or questioned their worth in relationships that only valued what they could provide. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with others who understand this journey. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own thoughts about family dynamics, boundaries, and finding the courage to tell your truth. Your story matters too.